And then there's the national program, which is for budgets over 3.5 million.
But it's okay, you don't have to apply for the $3.5 million or over because David Cronenberg will get it. Or maybe one of the other Cronenbergs. It's the Cronenberg Fund, actually. Hello and welcome to Off the Lot. The film industry is changing fast, and if you want to make movies, it's time to become your own gatekeeper. If you've got a vision and the drive to make it happen, this podcast is for you.
We're your hosts, Ken Kabatop and Anthony Epp, and every week we dive into the hustle, challenges, and real-world strategies of independent filmmaking. We talk to directors, producers, and industry pros about what it really takes to get your film made.
So if you're serious about making movies, hit follow or subscribe. It helps us keep this going. And if you like what you hear, spread the word, share the episode, leave a comment, and help more indie filmmakers find Off the Lot. Let's dive in. Anthony, how are you doing, sir?
I am doing outstanding. How are you, Ken?
I'm good. I'm pretty busy these days, juggling a whole bunch of projects at various stages of development on the TV side, on the feature side. It just kind of never ends, right? It is in some ways development hell, but also I love it. And when a project sort of moves forward in some way, then it's always a great feeling. But yeah, the main focus right now is just the early stages of development and looking for investors and trying to get my indie feature set up. That would be my directorial debut. How about you?
Very much similar. We're working on developing The Quiet Canadians. So this will be my first solo feature, but the development process feels, as you've said, never ending. But also, I believe this is probably one of those times where it's the most important time of the journey, because this is the time where we really have a chance to put everything out and set ourselves up so that the film has a really good chance of actually being made, but also succeeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're in development, I'm in development. It kind of sounds like we should talk about development and what that entire process is like on a holistic level, and cover our bases for anybody out there that's also in the same boat. I think it could be worthwhile, don't you?
I agree. It's sort of funny because we've been talking about offline a lot of times about how we're developing our story or just working on this week, working on that this week. And it was sort of kismet because we said, well, maybe we should have a whole episode talking about what development means for an independent film. And I guess let's just dig into it. I have a few points. I know you have a few points. So where would you like to begin?
We've talked in the past about story creation and what it really takes to get your script to the point where you can start to send it out to other people. So I guess in this case, let's assume that you have a script that's ready to go. It's good enough to send to, say, other producers, talent, that type of thing.
The way that we view development, or the way that I view development from a independent film perspective, which is, we might go through this, is there's differences obviously between getting an independent film developed versus getting a television series developed versus getting a studio feature developed. And when we talk about developing an independent film, it's more than just working on the screenplay, which is obviously one of the things you're continuously doing. I think the screenplay is never fully finished until you wrap on the last day, basically. But development is more about building a system and increasing the value of the movie you want to tell that will help get your film made and seen.
Yeah, versus how it used to be, which or the more traditional sense of development, in the studio system, which is you sell a TV show, you go into development, you work with the producers, you get notes from them and the production executives, but the systems are already in place as far as production and distribution of that television series. And same goes for a Hollywood feature of some kind. You sell a script to Universal Studios. Well, they already have the systems in place to make that movie and to distribute it around the world. So you, as a writer or director or whatever position you're hired on, you have a certain role to achieve, and you're going to do that. And you can't really stray too far from what traditionally is done. But when it comes to independent features, it's different for every project. But you basically, as Anthony was saying, was you have to continue to add value to your project to the point where, investors can't say no to it, and you make it undeniable. And then that will allow you to make this film. So you have to wear many hats as far as being a writer, director, producer in indie features. And that's really what we want to dive into today.
Yeah. So today we're going to focus on what I would consider to be the three sort of partners that you need to bring on board the funding sources, financing strategy, how to basically manage all of the various tentacles of the hydra that you have to have in order to make this work. And then also get a little bit into, if you are, which most of us will be on this, on an independent film, you're probably going to be not just the writer. If you're the writer of an independent film, you're probably going to be either the producer, the director, or both. The fundamental difference between development at the studio and the TV level is, ultimately, as an independent filmmaker, you're probably starting with nothing. You're probably starting with $0 and to get this thing
Yeah.
going. And the days us getting, $100,000 to develop your independent film and to go back to the drawing board and write and do rewrites. I don't know if that world is that realistic for most people these days.
It's few and far between, at least in my experience. Now, let's just say you're going to a production company that, maybe has access to funds, or it's a network or something like that. So many places just want you to come in with a fully baked idea already. In the 90s, you can walk into CBS and be like, I have an idea about like three men who go on a fishing trip. And they're like, great, here's $200,000 to write that pilot. Let's see how it turns out. That doesn't happen anymore.
And I think it comes down to, fundamentally, like, what used to be the valuable entity was the script. You had a script, and that's what people were buying. They were buying the promise of what was in the script. The script is still obviously an incredibly important component of it, but in my opinion, you need more now to sort of jar the money loose to make the film. The
Yeah.
script is just a beginning point, and obviously it all starts with having a good story and all these other things, but you also need to start increasing its value through either packaging or bringing in elements that are going to make this project sing much more than just the script is going to do. So, well, let's get started on. So this is a very entrepreneurial approach to developing an independent movie. Where I like to start is picking your partners, because the independent film, no matter what you want to say about, you spend all your time sitting there in your basement writing the script. Eventually, what's going to happen is you're going to need people to help get this film made. What I like to do is to break it down into three types of partners. What you want to have is, you want to have a distribution partner, a credibility partner, and a product partner, a production partner. For a distribution partner, obviously, one of the things that can really help elevate your development is finding some kind of a distributor or a sales agent, or somebody who has connections to the market, to the marketplace. And when we use these buzzwords of marketplace and all these things, ultimately what we're trying to do is find people who are going to help you get your movie seen by as many eyeballs as possible. I think that's ultimately the purpose. We have a lot of buzzwords. We call it the market, the windowing, and all this other stuff. Ultimately, in the end, you're going to make a movie. It's going to cost a certain amount of money. You're hoping that someone's going to help you get that movie in front of as many eyeballs as possible.
Yeah, and I like the way that you're thinking here, because the very first topic that we're talking about as far as the development process goes is one of the last things that most filmmakers think about typically when they're putting a movie together. They're often thinking about pre-production and production and everything that goes into making the movie, but they're not thinking about the back end of the movie and how to actually get it seen by as many people as possible and the ways that they're going to get that seen. So I love that the first thing that you brought up is distribution, because again, if you're just making a movie to put it on a shelf and not have anyone watch it, cool, good for you. That's honestly just a big waste of money. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what you're doing, and what most of us are doing. We want to make movies that can be seen by millions of people and hopefully provide a return for our investors, right? So what are the different ways that we can go about either getting a distributor or looking at other distribution sources? So not only theatrical, SVOD, TVOD, AVOD, all of that, but also what about the people who don't want to go with a distributor of any kind and actually want to self-distribute or active distribute, as we call it now?
Well, this is often one of the hardest nuts to crack. Is what, how do you find that partner? And what we have traditionally thought of as a distribution partner is someone who can help give us what I'm sure you've heard of this, is that minimum guarantee, like a little bit of money to help get you started, to help get the movie made, so that can become part of the finance plan.
Yeah.
And what the way I'm thinking of it is, you want people who see your movie as something that they think that in the future they're going to make money on. Because ultimately, in the end, what you're trying to do is create something that, for all of the little entities that are going to have their hands, that are going to touch this film, they all want to know what's in it for them. Am I going to be able to take this film, and is this going to do something for me if I distribute it? So if you approach with the mindset of, how can I help a distributor sell this film, versus how can I get a distributor to fund my pre-production or to fund the film or to put financing in for the film. I believe that's
Sure.
a very different approach. And especially if you, so then where do you go to meet these people or to find these people? I mean, I think that the traditional sense of going to film markets like Toronto Film Festival or Cannes or AFM or any of these places, those are definitely places where you can go and meet people face to face. And network, industry events in general are good places to go. But I also think that this is one of those places where having, working on film sets and working with other people, like you and I both worked in television, we both worked on features. We have a network of people that we've met throughout the years, and they're all 1 or 2 degrees away from, in separation away from distributors. So maybe you have to go that angle. We all know that we do business with people that we like, know, and trust, right? So that's the key, is to find people who have those connections that you might not already have.
Exactly. It's about finding the connections, but also, just to take a step back to it. I like what you said about, you have to make this a film that distributor gets excited about and knows that they can make money on. And so how do you do that? Well, part of that is going to come down to packaging as well, right? So
Hmm.
in this first group of partners that you need to attract or attach to your movie, distributor, sales agent, that type of thing. It's hard if you don't have, a key cast member in place or certain other production elements that make it extremely attractive, even with tax credits. That could be a part of it. A few years ago, I was attached to a movie. Well, I had co-written the film, and we were trying to raise quite a lot of money as far as a Canadian film goes. It was a $7 million movie. We had a great producer on board, and we tried multiple different ways to put this movie together. But one of the conversations that we had was with the sales agent, The Exchange, and they're quite famous. Everybody knows who they are, and they basically just gave our producer a list of actors, and they said, if you can get any one of these actors, that would make this much more attractive. And if
Hmm.
it's if you can't get one of the actors on this list, then we're probably not going to be interested, because we just know, based on our statistics, these are the actors that perform well for our company. And obviously that list is always being updated and revised, but that was just a very clear answer for us of like, well, okay, if we can we get Mark Hamill in for like 3 days, and
Hmm.
give him a role that we can put him on the poster, and we fly him in and out. He makes a bunch of money and is barely actually in the movie, but it's marketed that way. Just like Nick Cage did a lot of those movies recently over the last
Hmm.
10 years, right?
Yeah.
And there are ways to make this work, but then obviously you need connections to a big name, and whether that's your agent or someone else's agent, that's the way into it. So it's not easy. None of this is easy, by the way. But
No, and it requires a bit of social experience or social training. It's hard to be an introvert and develop a film properly. And again, that's sort of like if you're the director or the writer and you say, "Look, I just want my movie to be made. I don't want to have to deal with all this stuff." Well, I think that's in this, especially now. I think that you have to have a certain level of, I won't say outgoingness, but you have to have a desire to basically keep pounding on doors and make phone calls or make direct messages or emails or things like that, or just be willing to put yourself out there, because ultimately, and people are going to buy your film based on you first.
yeah, and it's a tough thing to do as well, because I don't know if this is the Canadianness in us, but I like what Laura Adkins said a few weeks ago, which was that in order to get her movie off the ground, she had to think like an American, and I kind of like that approach, where even myself, I'm putting myself out there more online and looking at new ways to, whether it's a newsletter or this podcast, in some ways. I'm generally a pretty private person, but in order to get myself out there and get people to hear about what I'm up to in a way, these are ways to make it happen. And so it is about going to industry events and networking and reaching out to people on LinkedIn and not asking for things right away. Build a relationship with people first. The more you can kind of give back to the community, the more the community will give back to you.
And you have to show that you know what you're doing. I mean, ultimately, in the end, this is where an indie film distributor who you are going to talk to, they want to, yeah, they're looking at your story, but they want to know that you actually can execute this thing. I mean, if they're going to put their name behind something, they want to know that it's going to work. And I would say the same thing for an actor. I'd say the same thing for anybody once we move on down the ladder. But it's like you've got to be able to sell your film, period. You've got to learn how to sell your film, and there's different methods of doing that. But I think that if you can't sell your film, nobody else is going to sell your film for you. So whether you're approaching your distributing partners or an actor or anything like that, you've got to know how to talk about your film in a way that is going to make someone want to be a part of your film, make
Yeah.
someone begging you to be a part of your film.
Since you're touching on the pitching side of things a little bit here, it's really important to know that like you're always selling something. Every time you open your mouth, you're selling something, and you have to know how to properly sell your movie in the rooms that you're in. So, I've pitched a lot, and primarily most of my pitches are in the TV world, and including some, Hollywood feature films. I've pitched at MGM and I think one other studio for like an open writing assignment. And when you're doing that, it's an entirely different world than pitching for an independent feature. And here's how. When you're pitching a television series, the pitch is normally booked by your agent in conjunction with the studio executive, and it'll be over Zoom or in person, but they have booked an hour for you to come in and pitch them a story. Now, your pitch is going to be between 15 and 20 minutes long. It's going to cover the pilot. It's going to cover the whole season, possibly a little bit into seasons 2 and 3. And then there's going to be, 20 to 30 minutes of questions. And the same goes for a feature. When I went down to pitch MGM, I had an hour and it was a 15 to 20-minute pitch, and I pitched the entire story of the movie, right? Like, we open underwater and this is what's going on. And we meet the hero, and he's this type of guy. And you take them through the whole movie because they want to hear the story. But when you're pitching an independent feature to private investors, above the line talent, but also below the line talent, you're not just pitching the story, you're pitching yourself as the person executing the story, as well as the production itself and how you plan to do all of this, because they know that it's all riding on your shoulders. Specifically for a private investor, my pitches are definitely no more than 5 minutes, but I would like to keep it in the 3 to 4 minute range where I talk about myself, the project, what it means to me. I do the broad beats of the story and what this is thematically, and then really just get into the discussion aspect of it. Because I think the faster that you can bring somebody into a discussion where they can ask you questions and you answer them, that's where you're really going to convince them that you know what you're talking about. One other key point on pitching, and this goes whether you're pitching a television series, a feature film at a studio, or an indie feature, the most important thing you can do is try to almost right away find that connection with the person that you're pitching and bring them into it somehow. Find some sort of emotional anchor that allows them a way into your project, into your backstory, into the story itself. And so I'm pitching a horror feature right now, and the story has nothing to do with my family, like literally nothing to do with it, but thematically it has everything to do with my family history, what happened to my family, and this dark cloud that is in my family history. And I open the pitch by saying, like, how this all came to be was, the story's loosely inspired by what happened to my family. And I say what happened, and it's a crazy story. And then I say, and our lead character is dealing with something like exactly the same in our story, except it's about this. And so now all of a sudden, the person listening to my story knows how important and relevant, my movie is to me as a filmmaker. And there's that emotional anchor that they can relate to because they can know about what happened, if it was a real event, or maybe something similar happened to them. And so you want to bring them in on an emotional level as quickly as possible, because that's the only way to keep them around for the entire length of your pitch.
Yeah, and then you want to get tactical about it, like you said, like there is a bit of emotional manipulation going on here, and it's important to realize that you're like pitching a film is exchanging your idea for money
Yeah.
or for support or for something. So like that emotional story that you're providing, you're presenting it in a way that says, you know what, I believe that you can, because this seems so personal to you, and now that I can see that you are not just a person who has a dream, you actually have the ability, because of your experience, your filmmaking experience, to execute this dream. I want to see the story on screen. I want to see the story made, but more importantly, I want to see you make the story because I want to give you the money to do it because I know you're going to take care of it. And so that's what you're trying to encapsulate with an independent film pitch. Like you said, with a television pitch, you're pitching the television show. Well, the studio and the TV network and everybody, we're going to find all the right people to make this happen. Like there's going to be a whole team behind you to make this happen. Whereas with an independent film, ultimately in the end, the buck is going to stop with you.
Yeah.
If this film is successful, it's because of what you've done. But if it doesn't work out, or if it doesn't get finished, or if it, whatever, I have to, ultimately in the end, you're the one taking responsibility for that as well. So if I have money to spend, and most investors, they have money for a reason. They don't give their money away foolishly.
Yeah.
So they want to give it to talented people, and the talented person is the first person who's pitching to them. That's the first person that they're looking at, going, can I trust this person to do the right thing with my money? They're not just going to take it and run with it.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing to keep in mind as well is that the mindset that I have going into these things is that I'm not asking for money. I have to be giving them something. So
Right.
I'm giving them an opportunity, right, in to invest in a movie that is going to affect them in some way. And so again, they have money, they have a lot of money. I recently had a pitch with an investor who was just like, I have so much money. I don't know what money's so easy to me. It always just finds me. I don't ever worry about money. You can't say to him, well, I'm going to make you money with this movie. Hey, first of all, never do that. But that's not the thing that's going to convince him to invest in a movie. What would convince him, and this is what worked, was the idea of making a film and going to a red carpet event and being at a film festival with
Mhm.
stars and being in front of the cameras and the lights and maybe doing an interview as an executive producer about the film itself. And like that was really enticing because that's something that he just can't do every day.
Mhm.
And so you're giving them an opportunity that they otherwise wouldn't have had. That's not always going to work with investors, but you kind of have to figure out who you're talking to, do some homework on them, and see what moves them. Sometimes it is just like, oh, I think it'd be really cool if my kids saw me make a movie. So I'm gonna do that. And it's what's that emotional attachment for them to get into this? Because again, it's if you're going into a pitch with a private investor saying, these movies typically make a ton of money and you are going to get 25% of your return or 125%, and you're going to have it at this schedule and make this much money. I'm sorry, but you're just lying at that point. Like there's no guarantee in any of this. You can say that these movies make money and you're giving yourself the best shot at it, but to guarantee a return on their investment, that's pretty tough.
Yeah. And these are what we call credibility partners. So your private investors essentially are the first people, especially those first people in, because it's always hard to be the first dollar in on any new project, any new business venture. It's always difficult to be that first person in. But what you're
Yeah.
looking for with regards to these investors and everybody is what we call is what I'm saying is called a credibility partner, which is someone who basically says, I'm vouching for this project. And that can be someone who basically says, look, I'm going to put my company's name brand on this on this film because this is going to be a XYZ company. Sorry, XYZ is a distributor. This is going to be an
Yeah.
ABC company
I believe
production.
ABC is also a company.
Oh, that's true. It's also a company. So this is going to be a blank 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 production. Triangle
Yeah.
square rectangle production. And you're looking for people who to give you credibility. And we think we need that big person to come on board. Like if I could just get Tom Cruise to sign on to my independent spy film, well, Tom Cruise has done Mission Impossible. So if Tom Cruise comes and does, I'm talking about independent spy film because, of course, we're developing Quiet Canadians, which is a spy film. If I could just get Tom Cruise, that would make the credibility go through the roof. And I think that that's not seeing the value in a lot of different types of credibility partners. So, someone like a local business person who says, "Look, I really want to see this film," who signs on and is willing to put their name behind it and willing to talk about your project to other people. So
Yeah.
that first investor, that first person that you bring in could be someone who's has a connection to the business community locally and is going to sell your film for you to those people. It's going to bring them out to VIP events and so on. That can be a very good credibility partner without that being a person who necessarily puts in $2 million and says, "Go make your film."
That's a really good point for the people that may be emailing or DMing on LinkedIn, 10 to 15 people a day and saying, I've reached out to 1,000 people. I haven't gotten any responses. Well, it's not the quantity of the people that matters. It's the quality of the people. So find the people that are the connectors that can get you in front of the 10, potential private investors that you actually need. And so it just takes a little bit more homework, but that's a great example. If you can just get one partner early on from the community that is then connected to like-minded individuals, that's how you should be approaching finding money.
really really important because again, like we talk about this whole thing of being shy and being, introverted little filmmakers. We tend to get into our little bubble of insular community, and when we talk to people, we only talk to other film people. So like we go to industry events and we wind up speaking to all the people we've worked on shows with before, which is fantastic, of course. But sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone and go, look, I'm going to go to the local board of trade meeting, or I'm going to go talk to a local business. And again, it's not about going and approaching your dentist and saying, "Can you give me $50,000?" But it's about finding out, where does your dentist hang out, and what kind of people does your dentist hang out with. And if you have a good relationship with your dentist and your dentist invites you along to something, then you're opening your door. And that dentist might not be even be someone who invests in the film.
Yeah,
I'm using dentist as an example, but it's the reason I think why going golfing was sort of that old school business networking thing. People like to do business with people that they hang out with socially, and
yeah,
so it's important to have a life outside of film in order for this to exist. So to meet people, you have to have a life outside of the film industry. And if you don't have one, think of what you like to do and go and
put
find a
yourself out there
community.
again.
Put
Back
yourself
to
out there.
that. Put yourself out
Yeah,
there.
put yourself out there. So that's
Yeah,
like, this is this idea of adding that credibility. You need other people to vouch for you, because you can talk about yourself, but you can only reach out to a certain number of people. Like you said, you can reach out to 1,000 people on LinkedIn and never have one person respond back. But if you can find one person who has 100 people, or who has a level of connection to what they call high net worth individuals, who they can talk to, well, they can
yeah,
do a lot of that work for you. And all have to do is feed them the information, feed them what they need to know, how they can sell your film for you. Then just say, look, I'll show up to whatever, I'll show up wherever. I'll show up to a coffee, I'll show up to a boardroom, I'll show up anywhere you want me to go, and I'll talk about my film for 3 minutes. Or whatever it is. Like, I'll come in there with this is what it is. And, thank you for the introduction. We'll have a little drink. And and that's what we'll do. You just need to be willing to take that first step and find that one credibility partner. And this person could wind up being a co-producer on your film. Like, maybe that's what you're offering them, as an ability to be a co-producer or some kind of an executive producer on your film, because they can connect you to those people.
yeah. Okay. Now we've talked about distribution partners of some kind. We have credibility partners. Now, what's the third type of partner?
Yeah. So the third type of partner, I would say, is a production partner. This is the iceberg underneath what you see at the surface. So these are the people who give you they give you, again, this sort of third leg of the stool, by being the type of the team that you can assemble underneath you, that lends validity to the ability to execute the project. Because we can talk about the fact that, you have a great idea for your horror film. I have this Canadian spy film. I'm pitching it. I'm talking about all the things I want to do it. And what I want to do now is I want to back it up with the best people I can possibly find that are going to help execute this film. So I'll just use my example as a spy film. I'm attaching a really good cinematographer, because cinematography is such an important aspect. And I mean, this would be for any film, of course, but you'd want to find a really good cinematographer who is going to make your film look great. So you're not just talking about, oh, we're just going to make another spy action movie that's going to fit into all the other action movies. But I've got a cinematographer who's an award-winning cinematographer, who's made films that have garnered critical and festival and commercial acclaim. And that's the person. I'm like, if you had Roger Deakins on your film, that
Yeah,
maybe
you're
people don't
probably
know
going
who
to get the
Roger
money.
Deakins is.
Yeah,
Yeah, but maybe people don't know who it is, but I guarantee you that anybody who knows film is going to sit there and go, okay, well, clearly you can make this. Like, this thing's
yeah,
going to look good, and that could lend to, they call it the key creative team. It's like, that could also be like a composer. Like, if you got a composer, or if you've got other key positions that you can kind of lay out, and again, I call it the sort of like the iceberg, the under the surface part of the iceberg. These are the people that lay out, and if someone looks at it, or if you put that in your investor document and you say, this is our team. We've got a lawyer. I mean, yes, of course you want to have a lawyer, but if you say you've got an entertainment lawyer from one of the more established entertainment law firms in town, who's going to be making sure that the project's done right. Our accountant has worked on multiple budget level features, all the way from $250,000 films all the way up to $250 million films, or
yeah,
whatever. And we've got a person in publicity who's a publicist for a lot of great Canadian movies. And we obviously want to make sure we have a really good stunt coordinator, right? We
yeah,
want to make sure that our stunt coordinator is someone who's actually established. We're not just hiring the first person we find. These are the kind of things that give a little bit of gravitas to the film and show that you're able to put together a talented team that's going to make this project. So it's not just going to be a finished spy film. It's going to be a really well made film. And I'm sure you're thinking the same thing from your end with regards to the type of people you want to bring in.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's also important to know is that the order in which you approach these various partners changes depending on the type of movie you're making and the relationships you already have. But say you're taking on a much larger project than you've ever taken on before, well, you're probably going to want to put these production partners in place before you go out to any sort of private investor, certainly a distributor, to just say, no, no, we know how to make this movie. And so your approach to the Quiet Canadians is perfect because you are putting the necessary components in place to prove to me that I know you're going to achieve what you're saying you're going to achieve. And so, same thing for me. I mean, my last film, we lucked out because of, the Directors Guild of Canada was behind it. So we ended up actually working with some amazing high level department heads here in the city. And they want to keep working with us. So, that was a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, you start to build a troupe as well. And then if you have previous work, a previous movie that you've made, whether it's a short film, a music video, a feature, whatever it is, to just show whoever you're going to, like, no, this is what we've done before. This is my amazing team. Look at their work. They were just up for this award. Their film just premiered at TIFF. You want to build that into your pitch, into your package, and convince people that they should support you.
Yeah, and especially because you and I are coming at this like from essentially first time solo feature film directors, right?
Not
Like a feature.
essentially, absolutely. For me, yeah.
Absolutely right. I mean, I've been a co-director, but yeah, like we're approaching it, even even two-time, even three-time, like that's still inexperienced in the industry, right? So how does an inexperienced director prove to someone that they can take on a feature film budget that is beyond what they could essentially save up for, what their parents are willing to fund? That's what you're trying to do, is add this credibility of, I have a good enough experience to be able to bring in top talent and to recognize top talent, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what you're proving.
It's what you're proving. I mean, if you just decide I'm going to make a $2 million feature and you've never made a film before, unless you're just independently wealthy, it's probably not going to happen. And so for, both Anthony and I, we have over a decade of experience in the industry and we have great contacts. We have a track record that people are aware of. We've done good work. And, I've made 5 short films in the same genre to be able to point to, for this feature to say, I know how to scare you. I know how to build suspense. I know
Hmm.
how to move you. If you have 17 minutes to spare, check out my latest short film, which is by far the biggest one of them all and has a massive budget for a short film. Ultimately, it was a $47,000 cash budget, but in kind, altogether is about a $92,000 film for 17 minutes. And I'm probably actually not going to be able to make something that big for a long time. Like, we had a huge crew. It felt like we
Yeah.
were making a TV show. Like, when you have a greens department on a short film and when you get to say like, "Hey, greens, can we, hide something in the background?" You have a big movie. So we were very lucky. But I get to now show that movie as a calling card to say, "Okay, in 17 minutes, I scared you, I made you cry, I did all of these things. Now give me a chance to do it over 90 because I've proven that I can tell a short story." And that's actually much harder to do than to tell a long story. There are different elements in a long form story. There's a bit of grace involved with it, where if you just have, a handful of really great scenes in your feature, you could probably squeak by, and as long as your ending is pretty good. But in a short film, there's no time to have anything that's bad. You have
Yeah.
to make everything count. Otherwise, people will just turn it off, look away, or leave.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's not very little room for error, and there's no and you have to capture someone in 15 seconds, or else
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
and that's it, and that's the thing, like, and that's where you build this credibility with regards to your part, like these teammates, these people that are going to bring you forward, because if you made a really good short film, well, your cinematographer probably did a pretty good job.
Yeah, the cinematographer, the rest of the crew, and the difference also is that they're really not getting paid very much, if at all, and so they're there for the love of it, and they're really going to put that on the screen for you for your short film. So you could end up getting some amazing work out of people. The point here is that, whether it's a short film or a music video or a micro budget feature that you made on your iPhone with your friends over the course of 8 months that took you, 2 years to put together in full, you're going to need something to point to before you tackle the big indie feature. And we're talking at a budget level of from 800,000 to 3.5 million.
That comes down to like that old Duff Simmons story, which was that he said, if you want to make a $200 million feature, make a $20 million feature. If you want to make a $20 million feature, make a $2 million feature. If you want to make a $2 million feature, make a $200,000 feature. If you want to make a two hundred
Yeah.
thousand, and so on, all the way down to 2,000. When you can make a movie for $2,000, it's good, and it's a movie, like people recognize it as this is a completed film and it tells a story and at least competently made, and it's an entertaining story, then I'm willing to give you a little bit more for your next thing. And
Yeah.
so the idea here is essentially taking what could be a perceived liability, which is inexperience. Inexperience is a liability in when you're dealing with money, and what you're doing is trying to surround that inexperience with experience, and with talent. If your talent and your experience that you are able to bring in are evident, then your inexperience as a director in making feature films at this budget level can be, I wouldn't say erased, but can definitely be diminished.
And so, as we're talking about this now, bringing the money in, let's talk about funding sources for development and for production, right? Because there are
Right.
so many different ways to put a movie together now,
Right.
from grants and public funding to private investors, sponsorships and brand partners, and even crowdfunding. So let's break that down a little bit.
So again, this is all happening while you've written your script, you've got a script that you want to make, and we're all this comes down to you need money to make it. And we're kind of talking very Canada here right now. So the options available for grants and public funding, and this is usually the very first place that people go, is to go to Telefilm Canada for funding. And both of you and I have had experience with Telefilm Canada,
Currently in
and
the thick
what
of it, as
currently
far
currently
as
doing it. Yeah, and there's some good options. There's the Talent to Watch program, which is for first time feature directors with a film that has a budget under 500,000.
yeah, Telefilm will give you 250 up to $250,000 to make your first feature that, yeah, as Anthony said, has a maximum budget of $500,000. There are a few other sort of key requirements involved in that, but generally speaking, it's them wanting to take a chance on first-time directors, and certainly, in the whole diversity and equity and inclusion aspects of that, and giving unrepresented voices an opportunity. So it's really good for that in Canada.
And it's very egalitarian. Now, the key behind all of this with Telefilm and with anything, of course, is once you've figured out, you have to figure out what your budget's going to be, which is something we might not have gone to. Is that what your script it has to have a dollar tag attached to it. A $6,000 feature is a different movie than a $250 million feature. And I've often said, like, there are movies out there that were made for $50 million that could have been made for $6,000 if you didn't have Meryl Streep in it.
Yeah.
So, but it's very difficult to make, for example, a Marvel movie for the price of Robert Rodriguez's El Mariachi, which was famously done for whatever $9,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So Telefilm Canada's Talent to Watch is for a $500,000 or under film, with them providing 250,000 on their end. But think to yourself, if you're going to apply for something like that, you have to think of what type of a film are you writing can that film handle a $500,000 or under budget. It'll largely be under 500,000. It's hard to make that as your first film, even at 500,000.
Yeah, because even if they give you $250,000, you still have to find the other 250. And again, those movies do a certain thing.
Right.
They many of them have similar elements. If you can Google, micro budget or micro budget is, I think technically in terms of Telefilm, is $250,000 and under. So this would be indie or low budget. But still, you can't do a lot of things in that film, from stunts and visual effects and special effects. So you have to make sure that your story fits it, but it is a good program. Let's also talk about just the main production program for
Right.
Telefilm. And that's what both of us have applied for this season. We won't know the results of that until I believe sometime in May.
It's May or June that they let you know.
Yeah, May or June.
So they have two levels of feature film production fund, which is, one is the regional fund, which you and I both applied for. And that's under $3.5 million in total budget. And this is all in Canadian money. And then there's the national program, which is for budgets over 3.5 million. And there are It's the deadlines and the sort of the application timelines are roughly the same. There's a few little persnickety differences.
But it's okay. You don't have to apply for the $3.5 million or over because David Cronenberg will get it. Or maybe one of the
Right.
other
Yeah.
Cronenbergs. Yeah. It's the Cronenberg Fund, actually, is
Yeah.
what it.
Well, the important thing to realize that because all joking aside is that 3.5 million and above, there are a lot of requirements that you have to have in place in order to be even considered for that 3.5. And one of the biggest ones is you already have to have that distributor attached. You have to have some level of what I guess you would call cast attachment and a level of production attachment. So all the elements that we talked about above in terms of the what kind of partners do you need, those have to all be in place before you go to Telefilm, especially for that national program, because they won't even consider your 3.5 and above without you having a lot of elements in place. Also, you need to have already been made a film or been
Released
part of
it
a film where
theatrically, and you have to be well on your way as far as a director
yeah,
goes.
as
Yes.
you said, that's why it's the Cronenberg sort of fund because it's like that money goes to people who have a track record already. And that's something again, like this is the progression of your career is that you've got if you were to take a look at Telefilm, you'd go talent to watch first, then you'd go to the regional fund and then you'd go to the national. Then there's the regional fund which both of us have applied under for our films. And so it's under 3.5 million in budget, but the key things are that there's certain amount of money that's given to each region of Canada. So there's a Western Canada region, there's sort of an Ontario region, an Atlantic Canada, like a Quebec one, so on. So they divide it amongst those regions. Now, where we as the Western side get kind of stiffed, if you will, is that Western Canada is defined as basically everything from Manitoba west, which is
Unbelievable.
over half of the country. So, there's a lot more competition for a much smaller piece of the pie when it comes to Western Canada.
Thank God there isn't a Cronenberg that lives over here.
Yeah, yeah. I'd be all for this if it meant that we got to see more Northwest Territories films or none of it films because they always get a film in this regional fund. Like if it was one per province, I think that would be kind of cool. But
It should be
but
one per province.
but
Actually, well, it should be
Ontario's going to
more.
get two or three.
It should
It
be
should be more,
more.
and then so there's an adjudication process. There's obviously some application guidelines in terms of the create. The judgment comes down to the creative elements, the track record of the production team, and so on. And
Cultural
with
elements as well. If you're applying for Telefilm, your film has to somehow be Canadian in some way. What does that mean? Well, that's the big question mark.
that is the
Um,
big question mark. Is
yeah.
is what is it? What does it mean to be a Canadian and to make Canadian films? So you can only get up to I think one third of your budget through the regional.
49%.
Oh, under a certain budget. So I think it's like under 1.5 or something like that. You can get 49%, but then if it's above that, it's up to a third.
Oh, okay, that makes sense because our film total budget is like 850,000. So we ended up applying for like $400,000 from Telefilm because the rest of it is private equity, crowdfunding, and tax credits.
Now, the thing to think about with regards to any of this stuff is when you're getting a grant, is that grants, and this is playing a little bit of inside baseball, but grants are a tax grinder. In other words, tax credit grinder. In that the more you get in grants, the less you can get in tax credits. The government's already given you money, so they're not going to give you a tax refund on top of your grant money. So when you start taking this money, you got to start making decisions about whether or not this is going to come in the form of an equity relationship with Telefilm or a grant relationship with Telefilm, and you have to make that decision based around your financing plan. So it's really important as you're putting your project together to think what pieces are part of this finance package, because you're never going to, as we all know, you're never going to get one person who's just going to sit there and give you $1 million to make your film.
No, no, it's going to be pieces. And even just on that point, this was a discussion that you and I had privately because as we were applying for this, I needed clarification on exactly what the difference was in terms of how Telefilm would handle this. And what it came down to for us, we ended up, choosing the option where Telefilm's support in our film would be private equity situation. In success, we will have to pay Telefilm back what is it, 10% on their investment
Right.
down the road. But what that allowed us to do is actually or it should allow us to make this movie for the proper number. If we took that lump sum from Telefilm as a grant, we would have drastically had to reduce our tax credit allotment and we wouldn't have actually been able to make the movie then, period. It's just the movie is a certain number. We know we can't make it for anything less than that. And that was how we had to go down this road.
Yeah, and it's an important thing to think about, like, because everybody says, "Oh, Canada's got this great grant program," which obviously the United States doesn't have. But it is an important thing to think about when you're putting together your financing. How is it structured? And if you, this is where you have to start to become a bit of a business person and realize, like, what's going to make the most sense for this film, because the more that you rely on that private equity, that means the more of a stake that the private equity has in the film, which means, and when I say that, it means you need more from your private equity. Your private investors have more on the line in investing in this film. Whereas if Telefilm has come in and given you the grant, your private investors are risking less because Telefilm's helping fund more of the film.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about private investors for a little bit.
Sure. So that would be obviously our second funding source, would be our private investors. So what's a private investor?
Private investor is anyone who supports your film financially with the expectation of getting a return on their investment. Standard return for independent film would be 125% of their investment. So if they put in $100,000, you are expected to pay back their full $100,000 plus 25% on top of that. And then beyond that, once all the investors are paid back, more than likely going to be more than one, then there are often situations where you can split the profits 50-50 or a certain percentage between the producers, the filmmakers of the film, and the investor pool.
The key elements in terms of private investment is that you're dealing with people who are putting money in and you do not have a legal responsibility to pay it back. So they're basically expecting to make money back on the success of the film. So that's where, again, we were talking about earlier, is when you're going to investors to try to provide them with the opportunity to support your film, they're doing so for two reasons. One, to get all the experiences involved with being a private investor in a movie, but also with an expectation of getting some kind of or a hope of getting some kind of a return that is not guaranteed. So that money could, in theory, never transpire. And as we know in Canada, making profits from independent film, definitely not something that you can guarantee to anyone really in the independent film space who invests in independent film.
We should also talk about how, with everything going on right now, with the trade war, with this buy Canadian push, and Canadians really being energized about doing business within Canada and sort of diminishing the borders between provinces from a business perspective, we got to talk about how we can make private investing in film in Canada a much more incentive to do so. And
Mhm.
so something that you and I have talked about, we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast, is this idea of changing the federal tax code to be more like Section 181 of the US tax code, which allows private investor to deduct 100% of their investment within the same tax year that they give their money away, that they support a film, a television series, or a theater production. And I think that we really have to start making a push to Minister of Culture and other lobbying bodies out there to make this possible. And just
Mhm.
make it attractive for there are a lot of people in Canada that can do this, but if you just get to tell them, like, it's going to be a deduction within the same calendar years as your investment, and then you are going to change the lives of these filmmakers and allow them to create their thing, and again, just allow us a chance to possibly make a return on your investment. Everybody wins.
I mean, in the United States, this is essentially how most independent films are financed, is by getting these sort of private investors, an investor class of people who just invest in film. They invest in a slate of films. There's oftentimes entire funds that are set up to invest in a slate of films, and that's how these films get funded and financed. And some of them make money. Some of them make their money back. Some of them don't make money. But in the end, if you're able to create a bit of a diversified portfolio with an incentive towards taking business losses or investment losses on during the year of a production, because ultimately, when you invest in a film, like, let's say we get investors for our film in 2025, we're going into production in 2025. Well, most of it's going to be spent in 2025. Then in 2026, as the movie is completed and starts to get sold and starts to be distributed, that's when we're going to start to get deals in for money to come back. And then by mid to end of 2026 or early 2027, we start to see returns. Well, that's an opportunity there where you get you get that investment loss, and then you only start paying taxes on the returns as the returns come in.
Yeah, but in Canada right now, correct me if I'm wrong, if an investor came in, they would have to claim it as a loss in 2027 once the film comes out and once you know if the film's actually going to make money and actually provide a return, correct?
Right.
Okay.
That is, I believe, the way that it's set up right now. So it's basically not, it's money you can't, it's money that's disappeared from your books for 2 years, and so there's nothing really you can do about it. You're still paying tax on it.
Let's talk about sponsorships, brand partnerships, and crowdfunding.
So sponsorships and brand partnerships are really, I think, an untapped market in Canada. And again, this isn't about going to, Coca-Cola and saying, we want to have you, or Reese's peanut butter cups or Reese's Pieces like an ET or something like that, and getting like a multi-million dollar brand deal. It's taking a look at your film and your film production process and seeing what sponsorship assets are available that you could potentially sell to people, and for them to get some kind of a marketing return. This is not giving anything away, and this is why I like this approach, because you're not asking for money. You're actually providing a marketing opportunity for a brand to establish a presence in an untapped market or potentially untapped market. Again, this comes down to what type of film are you make. So that's really what the first level is. What's your movie about? If it's a period piece versus a spy film, contemporary spy film versus a horror film. I don't remember. Is your horror film set in the modern time or
It's
in
modern, yeah.
so obviously that leaves open opportunities for just the simple brand placement. The idea of saying, look, like we have some key elements in our movie that are like we have a vehicle or we have a bottle of wine that people drink during the movie or something like that. Maybe there's a way to build a partnership with somebody there where they kick in a few marketing dollars
Yeah.
in exchange for having their product appear on screen.
Yeah, I think this is a great way to look at it. Back in the old days when I worked in production, I used to work directly with networks doing product integration and, product placement. I think you did as well, right?
Yep.
In terms of the clearance world and stuff. So I think this is a great way to, yeah, just find another way to leverage your film and get more out of it. And it's something that so many people overlook. It also depends on the film. Like, as I'm making a horror film, I'm not going to try to sell a brand in the scene where a decapitation happens or something like that. But
Right.
you have
Right.
to be
Yeah.
careful, and
Yeah, they're
brands
not
are
going to be
very,
wearing
very,
Lululemon in the. They're
yeah.
not going to be wearing a Lululemon jacket with the logo present, or necessarily, or something along those lines.
No, brands are
Or
quite
maybe they would.
protective, but there are definitely ways to make this work.
Well, and it doesn't have to necessarily be. So this is where I think things can go. Is it doesn't necessarily have to be just a cash investment. So the sponsorship doesn't have to necessarily come in just cash. So it could be in kind. So for example, location. That's an expensive line item in a budget. If you can get free locations, you can really, really reduce the budget, or at least account for the budget in a different way. So your, $2 million film can actually wind up only costing 1.2 in cost if you're able to get a lot of stuff for free
Yeah.
in exchange for certain things. So location sponsorship is a great one, because maybe you get types of businesses like dance studios or things like that where you show their storefront, coffee shops, bars, restaurants, things like that. You show their storefront and you advertise them in the film in exchange for the use of their property. And then you assess a value to that and say, well, this saved us $5,000 in renting a location. So instead of them charging you for the location, they give it to you for free and in exchange for some kind of promotional consideration. You can also get lots of things like, I know Apple used to do this. I don't know if they still do anymore, but Apple, most of the time would just send you free stuff if you asked them for it. They had a few
They used
rules
to. They're
about,
they're, they're a bit more
maybe a bit
stringent
stickier about that
now.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then certain rules like the one that gets me is that the villain of a TV show or movie is not allowed to use an iPhone.
Yep.
And
That was actually from Motive. We when I was doing clearances on Motive, that was the first thing they said was we had a killer and a victim, and the killer was not allowed to touch the Apple products.
yeah, so I was watching like a Hollywood film recently, and I was like, I bet you he's going to be the villain because everyone else had iPhones and he had an Android. And guess
Yep.
what? I was
Guess
right.
what?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what sometimes why they'll cover up, even if Apple gives them the stuff, they'll cover up the logo because they don't want, because
Yeah.
Apple has said you can't have our logo used in a negative way. But they will sometimes. Again, this this is an example of something that might not be 100% available right now, but might exist in other products. Is that you can get lots of free things for the film that from companies in exchange for some kind of promotional consideration. And that's a thing that you want to look at in your when you're breaking down your script and you're thinking about this with your producing partners and all this other stuff. Is like, so what could we get? What in here can we get for free? This is part of development because you're not going to be able to put this all together in 3 weeks before you go to production. You're not going to be able to get all this. So you have to be thinking about this is like, okay, so we have a car in this film. Could we talk to any dealerships about getting cars for free? Or would they, or what kind of car do we want to get? And, or are there any local companies that make stuff that we could use instead of us having to order it online and buy it and then try to return it later or whatever it is? And then also going out to, now any film can do this, is going out to all the local vendors in town that rent film equipment, whether it's camera equipment or Gripple X equipment or locations and so on. A lot of these companies, especially for lower budget films, will offer discounts on stuff all the time. Now, again, is this cash in your pocket? Not necessarily, but this is definitely something that saves a lot of money. And one of the great things about the Canadian tax credit system is that you get tax credits on labor, but not on gear, not on rentals, and not on like non-labor items, especially in Canada and in British Columbia as well.
Yeah.
So whatever you can get for free that isn't part of that tax credit is something valuable. So locations, food, GripLX gear, anything like that. Anything you can get a reduction on allows you to spend more of your budget on labor.
And therefore maximize your tax credit. Yeah, as far as Vancouver goes, MBS, Sunbelt, which is formerly William F. White, Matrix Rentals, Keslo Camera, the Sparky's Film Rentals, these are all super friendly places if you are a low budget film. So I'm talking anywhere from a short film to the $1 to $2 million range. They're going to help you out if you need it. It's not going to be necessarily for free, but they can certainly help you out in a big way. And they're all awesome people to deal with, and just they really are the backbone of the local indie film industry here. It's great to work with
Yeah,
them.
and this comes back to kind of these producing partners that we were talking about earlier, which is this idea of like credibility partners. So like let's say if you get Sparkies or you get Sunbelt or any Kessler or anybody like that agreeing to be kind of like a partner in this. In other words, they're going to give you a really good deal, and then what you do is you put that in your investor package. You say we have a partnership with Kessler, we have a partnership with Summit, we have a partnership with Sparkies, MBS, whoever. And you put their logos in your pitch package or in your investor package, and that demonstrates to investor that there's people in the industry who are rooting for you, who want you to succeed, and who are going to help you keep the costs down. And that's something that if I'm an investor and I'm putting money in, I'm like, okay, great. That means more money is going to get up on the screen. There's going to be more money into the money's going to be spent better this way. And it also shows that you've got the connections to make these things happen. Like if I know the heads of all these places and I can get them to say, hey, yeah, we'll give you a camera for X amount of percentage off or whatever it is. We'll give you a great camera for the price of a cheap camera or whatever it is for your film shoot. This is the thing that goes a long way. And again, it adds that credibility to the project. So the sponsorships can do more than just provide the cash or provide a discount, but also provide credibility. Let's say you partnered with a local, like a brand that exists all over British Columbia, and you could do some kind of co-marketing with them, like something where they, instead of, this is again not necessarily cash for you, but what it could be is something that is a way for you to build your audience out by having, I mean, if we could in British Columbia, it could be like Jim Pattison. Jim Pattison was if Jim Pattison's car dealerships all had advertising for your movie up in their dealerships or something like that. And I know
Yeah.
that that's probably not
Yeah.
going to happen, but I'm just saying, like, that's as an example. That becomes a marketing tool that you can use. So you're not even getting cash, you're just getting exchange, or developing relationships with influencers, so-called influencers online, and where you can build those kind of relationships where like you get on a podcast, for example, with if you're with your horror film, you get on a bunch of horror film podcasts in exchange for you getting on there. They're going to promote your film.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're talking about things that happen at the end of the entire process, but you have to start thinking about these actually at the beginning of the process. You need to
Hmm.
know where you're going at the very beginning.
Hmm.
And what, so, taking all of that in, all of these ways to make your movie undeniable, let's say you've covered your bases here. You've done a lot of this legwork. How do you manage all of this as an indie producer? What type of workflow are we looking at? What are some tips and tricks that people can consider as they're doing all of this.
I mean, first of all, it comes down to I don't believe that you can do it alone. So
Yeah.
I think it's really important to find, one, two, or three partners in the producing level of things. And that doesn't mean they have to be like industry producers, but just people who can take on some of the workload. So, for example, like just even just like the grant writing, for example, if you had someone who could just help with the grant writing and get that taken off your plate, someone who can help with the brand sponsorship, someone who can help with putting on investor events, someone who can help with and something like that, like that kind of a producer who might not even have much in the way of film industry producing experience could be very useful. So first of all, find people who can help you.
Yeah.
Don't find like 20 different people, but find two or three people who really believe in you, who are willing to partner up with you and willing to do some legwork. They're
Yeah.
going to earn their credit as producers. Ultimately, in the end, you have to realize that as the originator of this idea of yours, you are the only person who cares enough to stay up 24 hours a day to do this. So that
Yeah.
always, you have to always think that way, right? Like I'm sure for your project, I know it is for me. It's like if I wake up, I'm thinking about it. When I go to bed, I'm thinking about the film and how to make it happen. And every step in between, like I'm barely taking a lunch break because I'm thinking about something or I'm doing something regarding it. You can't expect that from your producing partners slash friends unless they have an equal stake in it, like you do, like they co-wrote it with you, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I totally agree. For me, I become obsessive about these things,
Yeah,
and that's when I know that I'm actually really like in the zone. But yeah, like I respect my partner's weekends, and I don't expect them to be doing this 18 hours a day, but I do. That's what I
you
expect
do.
of myself. But yeah. So, be reasonable with your partners. Unless of
Be
course
reasonable,
everybody's getting paid a ton of money, well then yeah,
right?
sure. Go for it.
But
No.
we're going to operate under the assumption that at this moment in this, and like development for an independent
You're
filmmaker
not
is
getting paid a lot
basically
of money.
free.
Yeah,
It's free.
it's
And
free.
if it's anything, it's a promise of money in the future, maybe, but it's free work. And so
Yeah.
you have to respect what free work is. And that means that free work means you can't expect deadlines and you can't have rush things that need to happen. So what it comes down to for yourself is you have to be organized yourself. I think the biggest service you can do as an independent film producer, if you're the lead person and this is your baby, is you have to be the most organized person of everybody. And that means that when you ask for things to be done of other people, you've got a logical plan of of when and where and why those need to be done at that particular time. So you're trying to balance that creativity, that juice that got you going, with business and logistics. And this is me being the assistant director that I am, is like, this is where I tend to lean very heavily, is just going like, how do we make this efficient, this process? All of these things still have to get done. They're all just as important. How do we do it efficiently? So how I've done this in the past is I break it down into quarters. Like development is not a 1 month project, right? I mean, first of all, it could take you a year to write the script in the first place, right? Or
Yeah.
a month or whatever. It takes time to put the story together. And then what we do is we break it into quarters, and you give yourself tangible goals and and projects that you want to accomplish by the end of each quarter. So each 12 weeks. And I say 12 weeks, a quarter is actually 13 weeks. But I say 12 weeks plus a week of buffer. And if you complete it all in 12 weeks, you get a week of vacation.
I
So
like that. Okay.
yeah, so you do it in 12, so 12 weeks. So create a 12 week. So from, if I was breaking this down, 12 weeks from today, if today was the starting point, I want to set up a micro project within the movie that I want to accomplish within the next 12 weeks. And so then you list off what are the things that need to happen. And so what I might do is I might say, okay, so my biggest thing right now is I want to, and it could be multiple projects, right? Like it could be like a few things that need to happen, but it's like ultimately in the end, what do I want to have by the end of this 3 month window? What do I want to have accomplished? And it could be like you've got two or three micro projects within that you're now going to work on a monthly basis. So as an example, I could say, well, okay, I have a first draft of the script, and let's say that I'm going to have a table read in week one, and that's going to give me some notes and some ideas to do a rewrite in the first 4 weeks,
Right.
because I know the script needs work. So I'm going to set myself a 4 week timeline to do a rewrite based on table read notes. And this is where, I mean, this is getting really into the weeds, because this is how I like to do it. Is I like to say, okay, so what's the most identifiable problem with the script at this moment, and pick one. So you know how you get those producer notes, so you get notes from people and they come back and there's like 5 pages of things that could be fixed.
Yeah.
Pick one. Pick one thing, and pick the one thing that is the most grinding, or the thing that you think is holding the script back the most. and spend 4 weeks fixing that one thing or trying to fix that one thing. Because if you try to fix everything, realize that you've probably got time, because I'm assuming right now that you don't go into production 4 weeks from now. My assumption right now is that, let's just say that you have a 3 month development window or a 6 month development window. I just want to fix one problem a month on my script.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
So
I put that in. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, like, that's going to be my goal for that. So then, and then in the second month, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, maybe based on the script that I have, I'm going to do some location scouting. I'm going to start finding out how much is it going to cost to shoot this. So can I lock down the location? If it's a one location horror film, I'm going to try to lock down what that location is going to be, because again, that comes down to, like, if I once I figure out that location, it's going to solve a lot of other problems. Or maybe it's 5 locations or whatever. And then in that third week, I'm going to work on a crowdfunding campaign, or I'm going to work on my grants, or I'm going to go and do some sponsorship outreach. And so I've created sort of three projects with an ultimate goal in the end of saying, okay, now what I want to do is this, by the end of this 3 month, 12-week window, I now have a script that is stronger. I have locations ready for my film, and I have built a sponsorship package that I can now take for the next 3 months out to sponsors and investors and so on. And
got
that's
it.
going to be my next quarter, if you will.
Okay. So in your process here, this whole thing takes about a year, assuming that you go into production about a year from when you start.
When you started your development process. So, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously it could be longer, it could be shorter, but they talk about development hell. Development hell is basically just not having any traction,
Yeah.
right? Like that, in my opinion, is development hell. Is like you've got a script, and I've been through this before with an indie script that I put out, where it's like I had someone else who was basically going to be taking it and trying to get an investor for it or get a studio to back it, and nothing happens for 4 months. And you can't really do anything, because it's not like you can start casting. It's not like you can really start, like, because you don't know what the studio is going to ask for. So this is taking the project into your own hands and saying, look, I'm going to make meaningful progress basically daily. But sometimes it's not going to appear like anything's happening, but I'm going to be making meaningful direction, because it would be better to have that, that nagging problem that people have with the script. Like, there's whatever, I don't know, whatever the issue is. It's like, let's just say that the ending doesn't seem to work yet, or there's a middle problem in the script that isn't working yet, or there's a character that doesn't work. But it's like, that's the thing that everybody's bumping on with your story. If you can fix that thing before you even get to asking for money, well, you've already solved one of the major things that you don't have to worry about.
Well, yeah. So for me, I guess where we differ on this plan, like again, everybody's going to work a little bit differently, right? We all
For
develop
sure.
our own workflows. For me, I wouldn't ever move on from the script until it was really good. Notes will always come in, but for me, I can't build an investor package or a pitch deck or pitch the movie until that script is like super solid. And
Yeah.
so I would spend a month fixing the script, getting that going, multiple drafts, that type of thing. And then in the next month, for me, I would work on, assuming I have a producer that's already doing the budget, because again, any script change you make is going to affect the budget in some way. You added a character, you added a location, that type of thing. You have to keep that in mind. But then also then looking at the investor package and building that out so that that's ready in the second month. And then going out to investors, or if you're going to crowdfund, conceptualizing the crowdfunding video, because that's a ton of work as well. Your
Yeah.
crowdfunding video can't just be like an iPhone, Instagram story. It takes a lot of work to get it right.
Right. And that's where I think like this 3 month thing works really well, because what you could do is, let's just say that you're going to do a crowdfunding event 3 months from now. You're going to start a crowdfunding campaign 3 months
Yeah.
from now. Well,
Yeah.
now is the perfect time to start planning for that. So
Exactly.
what are the elements that you're going to have for that crowdfunding? 90 days is a perfect amount of time to put together all the elements you need for that crowdfunding campaign, so that the crowdfunding campaign is still a lot of work, but you're not shooting videos during the crowdfunding campaign that you're going to upload. You're just reacting to the responses you're getting and deciding if you need more juice you need to reach out to more people or whatever it is during that crowdfunding campaign. So these 12-week blocks are really good for stuff like that.
But I think like the bigger point here, and why I really like breaking it down like this, is that you're making a movie. That's a really big, strenuous thing to do. And how do you, if you just say, okay, I'm going to make a movie, how do I make a movie? It's such a hard question to answer. You have to break it down into the tiny little elements. It's like, how do you eat a whale? One bite at a time.
One bite at a
And
time. Yeah.
so, what is the what are you going to do each day, or we have a year. Okay, let's break it down into 4 quarters, and then those 4 quarters into 3 months. What are you going to do within the 4 weeks in a month? And what are you going to do in a single week, down to 5 days, down to one day? What are you doing today to make your
Yeah,
movie make progress? And yeah, I think you have to sort of just break it down that way. And everybody's different. Everybody's going to have
everybody's
their own
different.
systems, but
But once you've decided to make that movie, like I think like once you've actually decided that this is the movie, the next movie you want to make. I mean, you've got to think to yourself, okay, so like the best way to do this is to sit there and go like pick a day for your premiere.
yeah,
Like the day the script the day that you're like, okay, this is the script. This is the story. This is it. Pick a day for the premiere. And that could be 2 years from now. That could be
yeah,
at
great. And then
Toronto
work
International,
backwards. Yeah,
and work backwards from there. So let's just say like, September every year is Toronto Film Festival, and I'm just using that as an example. So Toronto Film Festival 2027 is 2.5 years from now. Okay, so let's say that's the goal. So when do I have to have a finished film by? And you work your way backwards. You have to have a finished film at least by the deadline, right? By the submission deadline. Okay, so what does that mean for post production? Post production has to how long, and this comes from experience and knowledge and talking to people, like how, if I were to ask you how much time does it take to post produce an indie feature, you'd tell me it's, this amount of time. It's probably going to be whatever you want to say, minimum 3 months, probably 6 months.
I would say 6 months to a year, to be
Six
honest.
months to a year. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
if you were under a gun, you could do it in 6 months. If
yeah,
you really had to deliver, you could do it in three. But 6 to 12 months is a good post production time, depending on, again, the scope of the film. Like if you've got a lot of visual effects you're gonna have to
yeah,
add, then it's gonna be closer to 12. So work backwards from there. Okay, so what is the last day of production then, based on that
yeah.
post production timeline? Well, if the
Yeah.
last day of production is here, so now how many days of production roughly should an independent film have?
You're gonna be anywhere between 15 to 25. 25 is
15 to
like, you have a
25.
lot of money, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So 3 to 5 weeks,
yeah,
right? So now build that window in there. So now you've got 3 to 5 weeks. You cut that out. So now let's just make it 4 to 6 weeks of pre-production, of solid pre-production. And this
yeah,
is just as a guess. So right there, you've now got the end of development on your calendar,
yeah.
because you've got the start of pre-production on your calendar. Well, that's how much time you have for
That's how
for
much time you
development,
have to put all of these elements into
to
place.
get
Yeah,
all of these elements in place. And if you look and you go, shit, that's not enough time, well then TIFF 2017 or 2027 is not enough time.
yeah,
You don't have enough time to get there. So either
yeah,
you have to truncate the schedule, or you have to give yourself more time and give yourself a different. And then once you've got that all kind of like, okay, this feels realistic, now you're breaking it down into quarters, monthly tasks, and then daily tasks. And like monthly tasks are kind of like monthly deliverables. And you kind of have
yeah,
to give yourself deliverables. Like you have to be your boss. You have to sit there and go, okay, Ken, I know you're the writer of the screenplay and you're the writer of this film. You need to get to us the second draft by the end of next month.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
you have
I
to
think
give
having a
yourself that.
deliverable at the end of the month is a smart idea, whether that's a pitch deck, a finished budget that you can actually start working off of, a finished script, a crowdfunding script, an investor package, slash business plan, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, deliverables are great, and then you also just have to
And
give
you,
yourself time for the stuff that's out of your control. Because if you send an investor a package, that could take a week, it could take 2 weeks, it could take a month for them to get back to you. You don't know. Everybody's on their own schedule. So you need to build in this buffer of being able to, work with people in the real world.
I heard this on another film funding podcast somewhere. Take a guess at what the average length of time it is from meeting a potential new investor to getting money from that investor is,
Oh,
assuming an investor actually says yes.
I don't know. I'm going to take a guess around 3 months,
6.
6 months. Yeah.
Yeah. So you might meet someone tomorrow and they invest on Friday, but for every investor that would do that, it will take a year to get another investor.
Yeah.
And that's of the people that actually are like willing to take your phone call. And so if you need investors for your film, you're not going and you want to go to pre-production in 3 months and you haven't started yet, you might need to rethink your film
Yeah.
or
It's
rethink your
likely
schedule.
likely not going to happen. That's a very interesting statistic. Yeah, that's good to know.
I wish I could cite the source, but I'm gonna just, even if I'm wrong, or
Mhm.
even if the source wasn't a good source, I'd say 6 months is a good realistic thing, because it's like, how long does it take for you to build a relationship with someone enough to the point where they're willing to give you a sizable chunk of money for a film? Even if that number is skewed, you could still say 6 months is probably pretty reasonable, because in my experience, at least, that's basically been about the relationship level, is like for us to get from first meeting someone to actually having meaningful conversations about money, it's been between, 4 to 8, 9 months. I mean, it
Yeah.
really has been in that window of time. There's definitely not money dropping in the first month. That's for sure.
No, for sure. And then also just taking into account the current state of the world, the economy, all of the uncertainty out there. And yeah, there are a lot of investors right now that are wondering, should I just hold on to a bunch of cash right now? Because who knows? The stock market's been tanking for a few weeks now, a couple weeks. And yeah, it's just, there's a lot of
Yeah.
uncertainty. Okay, so look, there's a lot to keep in mind as far as development goes, and we can talk about all these elements even in more detail. But as far as final takeaways and any sort of actionable advice that we have when it comes to development, Anthony, kick us off. What do you think?
The right partners are going to make all the difference. When you first make the decision that you want to make this movie, is you've got to start surrounding yourself with the people who can help you make it happen. And I think that's where development really starts. And so what I would say, if I were starting out right now, like, if I when I make that decision that it's time to start making this film, what I'm looking now for is people who can help make the project better, can give me more credibility on this project, and then, what's the end goal of this? If I know that I'm going to be, if I have a distribution goal in mind, if I have a film festival in mind that I want it to premiere at, I'm putting that on the calendar. So, and then I'm building my partnerships around that. I think good filmmakers know how to put together good teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think for me, the other thing to keep in mind, again, I come from the script background, is just put in all of the work, get that script as good as possible. Also, so that you don't have to worry about it too much, right? You know that the script is tight. You know that you can send that to anybody without ever thinking, oh, I wonder if they're going to bump on this part, or maybe this ending isn't working. No, get the script right and then have the confidence to send that out to anybody, an investor, an executive, a producer, an actor, a department head, and just know I don't have to worry about the script. I'm now going to worry about all of the other elements, ahead of that. And so for me, that's important. As Anthony said, getting the right team in place and giving yourself time, because you don't have money, right? Like, generally speaking, indie film development is where you're going to be working for free. And when you work for free and you expect other people to work for free, it takes a lot of time. If you were able to pay everybody $3,000 a week, well, you can demand a lot more from them, right? That's
Mhm.
that's what the money is for, to quote Don Draper. And so just give yourself time to get it right, but keep going, break things down into quarterly chunks, weekly chunks, daily chunks, whatever it takes, but just stick to the schedule and always be moving forward.
Yeah, development is a business and a creative process. So it's important to keep both balls in the air as you're moving through this really important process. And it comes down to that old adage: good, fast, cheap, pick two. If you've got no money, then you've got to take it slow if you want to make a good project. All right, so we definitely bit off a lot in this episode on development. We would like to hear from you. So please do send us any questions or any struggles you're having with development of your film project to podcast.offthelot@gmail.com. And we'd like to do a follow up episode. I think this would be a fun follow up episode to answer questions from people out there who are trying to develop their own indie films.
Yeah, let's do a Q&A. It'll be a blast. Okay, so that's it for this week's episode of Off the Lot. We want to hear from you. If there are any topics you want covered or any questions you'd like answered, please email us at podcast.offthelot@gmail.com.
You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube. Our handles are in the show notes. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And share this with your friends. See you next week.